This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program. This is All India Radio. In the national program of talks, tonight, we bring you a discussion entitled With Malice Towards One and All. The participants are Narayani Ganesh, senior journalist and writer, Ravi Singh, well-known publisher, Preeti Gill, writer and publishing executive, and Humra Qureshi, well-known columnist and writer, who initiates and moderates the discussion.
Tonight in our national program of talks, we are here to talk about Mr. Khushwant Singh, the writer, the journalist, and the man. It will be a longish sort of discussion on these aspects to Khushwant Singh, and we have in the studios here Narayani Ganesh, who's a senior editor and a writer, and we have Mr. Ravi Singh, who's published him and he's known him, and we have Preeti Gill, who's also a publisher and a writer. I'll start with Narayani because I have seen how fond he was of you, Khushwant, and if you didn't meet him for say even 2 weeks, he used to ask me that, where's Narayani, how is she? And when you were doing your book on your father,
Yes.
then he was very keen that you do the book very fast. He said, because you cannot delay a book.
Yes.
So Narayani, you tell me, what was your bonding like with Khushwant Singh?
Humra, my relationship with Khushwant Singh was hide and seek. Right from the beginning, because he got it into his head that I must pay this tribute to my father, Jamni Ganeshan. And he said, it's so easy for you. It's just an anecdotal account of a daughter's perspective of her father's life. Why don't you do it? And my father passed away in the year 2005, and the publishers were giving me a deadline of, to finish it within a few months. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And I think I sat on it for about 3 years without doing anything. I think I just wrote one chapter. And then I started avoiding Khushwant Singh because each time I would see him, the first question would be, have you done it, my dear?
I know.
So I said, oh my God. And I would tell his son Rahul, I said, please don't think that I don't want to meet him. But the first thing he's going to ask me is, have you written the book? And I just don't have an answer. He said, no, you must go and meet him. So when I went and met him one day, and he looked at me and I looked at him, and we both knew what was going through our mind. And then he said, you are just a lazy woman. That's all I can say. And that really got my goat. And I said, okay, I'll show him. I will write this now and I will show him. And you won't believe it. I sat and wrote it in 15 days flat.
The entire book.
The entire book. And of course, later I had to do the captions for the photographs and all that. But the core of the book was just done in 15 days. And the publisher was astounded and they said, what happened? I said, that's the Khushwant effect.
But according to you, what was that big quality about Khushwant that kept you meeting him? I mean, that bonding was there between you and him.
I think whatever people may say about him or whatever perspective people have of him, I think he was a very compassionate man. He was so compassionate, very sensitive, and he was a great listener. So he would be so patient. He would hear you out, and then he would say a few words that would be so soothing that you felt good after talking to him.
That's true.
Whatever it was.
There was something very good.
He was very non-judgmental. Very non-judgmental. So I think he was a great friend more than anything else. And the other thing I really admired in him was that he was so encouraging of new writers. Like, why should he bother? I mean, he was an established writer.
Absolutely.
And he was so well known. And like, anytime you go to a bookstore in the new arrivals, you'll find one of his books. Why should he care? But he did. I've seen him with even other youngsters who came to see him, who were trying to write something. And he would always say such encouraging words of advice that I think it kind of inspired them to, okay, go ahead and do it. He kind of instilled some confidence. So I think that was a great quality in him. Whereas there are many writers who are good writers, but they are not mentors or they don't have that other side to them. He was very compassionate and very encouraging, I think.
And Ravi, I met you, I think the first time at Khushwant's home, and you published him. And you were again there as a friend also, not just as a publisher. So what are your views on Khushwant?
Well, I think, Narayani was saying he was a man of compassion and also was very encouraging. And I think that is something that informed his writing as well. There was a great generosity of spirit in his writing just as there was in his interactions with people. Because, many authors, they take themselves very, very seriously. Khushwant Singh did, of course, and respected his craft, worked hard at it, but he never took himself so seriously. So I think that was a great quality, where he understood that he was writing for people. He had to communicate with people. So he never talked down at anybody. It was
That's
always
true.
a conversation. So what you said, that he was a good friend, I think even with readers, why he was so popular was because he was a friend as a writer, and you didn't feel intimidated. You knew each time there would be something to entertain you when you read him, and there would be this compassion underlying everything. Even when he loved calling a spade, and there were very few people who had his kind of courage there. But even that was done without malice. In fact, this whole thing of with malice towards one and all is it's a huge lie, which he of course encouraged, because, but he was a man without malice. And so in his writing too. So for me, it was great experience, because it was, the generosity. Who was I, young person. And when I started working with him, I was actually very nervous. But after the first meeting, it was all gone. And then he said, chalo, Kasauli, just come visit me in Kasauli. We'll spend a few days and we'll finish working on this book. So that was how it started. And then, as you said, it became a friendship. Actually, still, I'm amazed at the ease with which I was able to talk to him. There wasn't this sense of a legend that, interacting with. So, so the experience was great. And I honestly, except for one or two people, there aren't any other writers of any age who are like him, not only in how they write, but also in how they interact with their readers and their editors. So he was a very, very special human being.
Any touching incident or something that you feel is really out of the way that he went ahead?
Well, with
Did he
many
keep with the
people-
deadlines? And
Yeah, well, yes, he did. And I remember that there was one particular book, a story. It was very moving, but I think he'd lost interest in it after he started writing it. And so, I would talk to him, sir, can we make this little change here? Can you rewrite it? So he did. And then finally, when he gave it to me, after he'd done it, he said, Acha bhaiya, I've rewritten it. I know you're not going to be happy with it.
But
So why don't you rewrite it, and then I will see. And so I said, really? He said, yeah. So we edited it. I showed it to him, and he was very generous. And obviously, you can't write like him. He made a few changes after that. But that kind of trust. And
no, he had that
allowing you-
thing that he trusted the other person.
There was no insecurity, none at all.
That's
in
absolutely
him as a
correct.
writer. And one thing I do want to say is that, if you read his books, for instance, Delhi, which I think is a masterpiece, any language, anywhere. And it's become fashionable, it had become fashionable for many people to say, oh, Khushwant, he writes so much and a lot of it is rubbish. It's such nonsense. People who haven't read him, because he was a very, very fine writer. Sensibility was extraordinary. The way he wrote with a great simplicity, that was extraordinary. I think he was one of our greatest writers. And he didn't boast about it. He let people say all these things about him. That again is a certain generosity, I think.
And he wrote very, very moving pieces on the 1984 riots. In fact, the only time I saw tears in his eyes were, I think, only on 3 occasions. Once when Meenu Bhandara had got pictures of his home village, Hadali in undivided Punjab. Then when his wife passed away. And then during the 1984 riots, I mean, even after there was any mention of the 84 riots, he used to really look worked up. So I'd like to ask Preeti, you've been reading him extensively, and you yourself have written about the 84 riots. What is your take on his writings?
Yeah, thanks, Umra. The thing is that it's really lovely to hear all these stories about the person, because I did not know him, but I knew him only through his writings. And whatever I had read was right from Train to Pakistan, which was like this iconic novel about partition. And it's also the fact that there were so many stories in there that are stories in all our homes in North India. So all of us have this kind of inherited history. And therefore, I think as a Punjabi and as a Sikh, I was sort of reacting to whatever I had read. And so whether it's the history of the Sikhs, or whether it was the partition novel, or then later how he reacted to what happened in 84 after Mrs. Gandhi's killing, all of those things. So it's also this whole thing of coming to an identity and to be able to understand who you are because of certain
He
unfortunate...
gave you that
It
sense
was-
of
yes,
identity.
it
Yeah, he
was
was very,
this
as a very
whole-
proud Sardar.
Yes, and so, when you read things that actually speak to you, to the real person inside, and even if you haven't gauged that person, and even if you don't know that person really, or haven't recognized those things in yourself, it's like when you read somebody and that person is actually speaking to that part of you. So those were the sorts of things that I realized, and the fact that he was very straightforward in the things he said. He returned
Absolutely.
his award
Padam Shri written, yes. Very straightforward writings, absolutely,
all of that. So
from his
all
heart.
Yeah, the things were all sort of present day history and where you also featured in that history. So all of those were the sorts of things that I would sort of react to.
And he was a very conservative man. And the other thing about him which I noticed, that if he knew that the other person whom he's fond of is going through some personal lows or some emotional turbulence, he would go out of the way. And that was something so unlike a writer otherwise, because most writers are into their own little shells. They feel, their time is their time and they don't want to. But Khushwant had that very, very big quality that he was to reach out to people if he knew they're going through lows or personal things. And he was caring, which I think everybody who knew him realized that. So Narayani, if you'd like to say something more to this.
Yeah, I think it's also because he loved stories. He loved to listen to stories, especially of a personal nature, and the more scandalous it was, the better. He had
that little
great interest. But on the other hand, as I said, he was very non-judgmental, and he would listen with great interest, and he would also pop in a few questions in between, so you knew that he was really listening. And he would also give his own inputs, and he was so involved. And sometimes I would think, okay, maybe he's going to use some elements of these conversations in his stories, which is what I think makes a writer a good writer, because what do you write? You can't write from thin air. You do have a fund of experience and you listen to various people's stories. And he was a great storyteller. But I would also like to mention, Humra, that I think he was a very good historian of Sikhism, like his book, The History of the Sikhs, volumes 1 and
Absolutely.
2.
I mean, there's a masterpiece.
That's how I actually got first introduced to him, because my publisher said, why don't you go meet Khushwant Singh and why don't you get him to write something on the Sikhs? So for the column I was editing, so I said, do you think I can go? I've heard there's a board outside his house which says, don't come here.
Don't press the bell unless you are
Don't-
expected
yeah,
or something.
So he said, well, you just go and make an appointment. That's it. So with great trepidation, I made this appointment, and I was asked to come at a certain time, and my heart was fluttering, and I said, oh my God, this must be a very wicked man,
And he was an angel, actually.
Yeah, I know. So when I went there and I looked for that board which I'd heard, and I
Don't
saw,
press the bell or something.
Don't ring the bell unless you have an appointment. And then someone opened the door and I was shown in, and I can't tell you how warmly he greeted me. And I think he didn't expect to see a very young person. This is, I think, about maybe 20 years ago or something. And he says, welcome, my dear, welcome. And like he showed me into his room and the chair and everything. And I felt at home immediately. And I said, oh, why did I think he was a horrible man? And then he started talking about, I think it was Guru Gobind Singh that he talked about. And why Sikhism had this martial aspect and all that. So I was taking down notes, and I also had my recorder on. And so he said, what do you want to do with what I'm telling you? I said, I want to publish it in this column. So he says, okay, but just don't misquote me or something like that. I said, no. I said, do you want me to send it to you after I do? He says, no, go right ahead, my dear, and all that. And then it was published, I think the next day or the day after. And he calls me up. He had taken my number, of course. So he calls me up and he says, my dear, you've made me so famous. I said, I made you famous? But you're already famous. He says, no, I'm getting calls from Chandigarh. I'm getting calls from different parts of the country saying, what a wonderful article you've written. And you haven't put your name there. I said, but why would I put my name? It's what you said.
Your words.
So he was very impressed with the way it was presented and all that. And I felt really good. And after that, like, he would call me and invite me to his home and say, so and so is coming, why don't you come and meet this person? And that famous 7 to 8 evening meetings
1 hour.
where I met a galaxy of interesting people.
Absolutely, yeah.
And he would always make it a point to introduce each one of us, and
he had a connecting thing, people,
Yeah.
like he wanted to get Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs all on one platform.
Yes.
That was a very basic thing. And he made sure that even if a person is shy or introvertish, that no, get out and come and meet. That was a very big quality. In fact, Ravi, I've seen you there when Naipal was there and Suraj Paul, and there was easy conversation. So why didn't you just talk a little about that? Those evenings we had, from 7 to 8. We in fact met all of us met there.
I think he had this quality, I mean, as I said, because he himself was never intimidating. And when you said, you made me famous, which you would think, what are you saying? You're already famous.
Yeah,
but he,
exactly.
at some level, he genuinely did not believe that he was, such a big thing. So therefore, everybody who came there, that was a space where, whether consciously or not, they lost this, either the quality of being intimidating or,
It was
of
very
being
casual
formidable.
evening, warm evening.
Everything became informal. There was Naipaul, there was this
Rajpaul.
wonderful meetings. I met, Vikram Seth, of course, one knew him, but even here Vikram Seth was a little different than he is in real life. Many big names, and one of the most charming evenings was with Ahmed Faraz there, and there was a lot of Sher o Shairi happening, and light-hearted, good banter, etc. So it was wonderful. It was wonderful being there. But just one thing that you did say about him bringing people together, and before that you'd say that he was conservative. I would say he was old-fashioned. But he wasn't conservative. He was progressive.
Of course, progressive, of course, in his views.
Yeah, in his views, and for everybody was equal.
No, he had some values in life.
He had
There
no
was a-
patience for bigots. Bigotry. So therefore, whoever came there, they were friends, they were, equals, and so that he liked to, bring people together. And if he felt that somebody was bigoted or somebody was unpleasant,
absolutely out.
I didn't see them again.
Never.
in those
No,
things.
like what I meant by conservative, that he had this old values with him.
Absolutely.
And topping the list was loyalty. He said, नहीं तो बात नहीं बनती है. अगर दोस्ती में आप वो, दगा कर दें तो बात नहीं बनती है. And he only got people who were liberal, who were actually good people, because he told me 2 people I keep away from, people who are communal and people who are corrupt and rude.
Yeah.
In fact, he's ticked off people who were rude. He said, no, you cannot be rude. And he said, after the partition, it's very important that we've suffered so much as a nation that to get people together.
Yeah.
Because when he had to do the history of the Sikhs, he could have done from DU, Delhi University, but he went to AMU, Aligarh Muslim University. He said, because I want to bridge that gap. So he had all those qualities. If he wanted to make 2 friends meet, he would get them the same day without telling each other. And the loyalty part, I think that's a very big quality. And he didn't bother who's who on the political circuit. That's, I think, very big quality. And he kept to very simple ways. So anything more that, because people have been meeting him for years, so...
There's just one thing about his,
please,
he's had this childlike quality about him.
Yes.
Exactly.
Childlike enthusiasm for new
Till the
things.
end, till the
Absolutely.
very end.
Curiosity about things. So when people said he loved gossip, it wasn't that he loved gossip. And as you said, you didn't find where someone was vulnerable, they had shared secrets, and you would not find those things in his
Never.
No.
So he loved it only because he had this childlike,
Till the
curiosity
end,
for things.
till the end, his eyes were that of a young boy.
Oh, absolutely. The way he laughed, my God, it was like this, he had
He
a
would just
lovely
giggle
sense of
around.
mischief. Yeah.
And he talked everything about his own life. There was nothing hidden. There were no hidden secrets. And he used to enjoy talking only with a small group, not with everybody. He could be actually very, very, if people he didn't really like or he didn't really find them okay, if they call up or something, he used to not be rude, but he used to be impatient. कि भाई time नहीं है इस type का.
Humra, do you remember that once, though 7 to 8 was the time when visitors would come, and 8 sharp they had to leave. But he did invite us to stay on one day for an idli meal.
Yeah,
remember?
I remember.
So
Because he wanted us to be
honored,
there.
and he said that I love idlis and I'm going to order them from South Indian restaurant. So he made us stay back, and he insisted that we share the idlis with him. That one, we were so honored. And then once we had that, and we had a little chit chat, and then he said, okay, now you may go.
And if he really cared, like, if Narayani wasn't there for maybe 2 weeks, and those were landline days, and he was anyway not into cell phones or anything, then if I would go, then he said, bhai, kaisi hai wo, kahan chali gayi, like he was actually bothered, like a father actually, very father
Actually,
figure.
what happened is, when the book was finally published, I did go there to give him a copy personally, because I thought this thing is his creation actually. Without him, I would never have written it. I wouldn't have bothered really. So when I went to his place, I didn't make an appointment or anything. I thought I'll just go give it to him. It was in the afternoon or something. And his staff opened the door and he said, wo to so rahe hain. He's sleeping. So I said, okay, then let me leave the book here. You give it to him, and then I'll talk to him later. But by then, he had become a little hard of hearing. So one couldn't have a proper conversation on the telephone. So I said, okay, let me leave a letter with the book. So I wrote a letter saying that I came, but you were napping. I didn't want to disturb you. Thank you so much. This wouldn't have been possible without you. And I'll see you later. So I gave it to the staff and I said, please do give it to him along with the letter. And I left. And then I got busy and then I forgot all about it. And then suddenly somebody tells me he's written a column that you're not his friend anymore. Your
He
book is
used to get
published.
hurt very easily. He used to get hurt.
Yeah.
very-
That person said, I've read a column and he says, Narayani used to come and see me and then encouraged her to write the book, etc. Once the book was published, she forgot about it.
That was like a childlike.
So he concluded the column by saying, she is no longer my friend. I was so upset. I said, oh, what happened? So then I rushed and then I went, I think I tried to contact him or whatever. And then I explained to him. I said, listen, I came and I gave this letter. So apparently it was never given to him.
And he used to get hurt.
The letter
very
wasn't
easily.
given to him. The book was left on his table, but the letter must have fallen off somewhere. So he was so hurt, like a
Like a
friend
child,
who gets
yeah.
very hurt.
Like a
and-
child.
Yeah, and I had to kind of pacify him and I explained to him that no, you were the first person I came
No,
to give the book to.
Pacify is the right word.
Yes.
There's just one thing I wanted to, and maybe Preeti could talk
No,
about it as a reader
Definitely.
and somebody who understands
much.
his politics. Is that this Sikh identity was very, very important. And strangely, strangely is the only word that can come, but not so strangely, maybe paradoxically in a sense that he was very, very conscious of that identity. He always talked about it, but he was an agnostic. And he also criticized, orthodox Sikhism too, just as any other religion. And that, I think, was something that not just people who knew him well, everybody got a sense of it and understood it. And despite the fact that he was vocal that I'm an agnostic, I don't believe in certain rituals of my faith, but he had this huge popularity among even conservative Sikhs. So how would you explain that?
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting actually, because I've grown up in a home like that, so I can identify
Your
with that
father,
as well.
Mr.
Yeah.
Dylan is also
Yeah, really easily, because my
Same
dad would
values,
always say he's an agnostic, and of course he's a proud Sardar and a Sikh and all of that, but the religion part of it never really entered the being or the person that he was, although he would, yes, be able to give you the history and everything else behind everything and all the, whether it was the book or whether it was to do with the guru or whatever, but it was not like he believed blindly in any of these things. So as children, we never grew up with this kind of dogma stuff anyway. So I can understand something like that quite easily, this kind of seeming dichotomy, but it's, I think, an intelligent and a much more intelligent way of dealing with your religion and yourself, and being able to make the distinctions where they are important to make, and not be able to blindly follow stuff.
Absolutely.
And I think for somebody like Khushwant Singh, this whole thing of 84, which is what you said earlier,
he
really
was
came as
shocked
quite
and
a
very
shock.
upset, very
and
upset.
The fact you have mentioned about his loyalty, about his great friendships and things, and I think a lot of that got a beating as well, because I've only read about these things, but a lot of people who turned against him or who didn't speak to him after, or who said, prominent people who said things like that, it's time to teach the Sikhs a lesson, and he actually heard all of that and he reacted to it quite sharply. In the aftermath of those 2-3 days, he writes somewhere that there were just 2 couples who rang him up to check up on how he was, and nobody else really did. For somebody who's as prominent a citizen, a Sikh of Delhi, living in this posh neighborhood, to react like that, you can imagine what happened to people in other places. So these are things that one has been hearing and one has been feeling, because living through those days in Delhi, these were the sorts of things that you were suddenly confronted
He was
with.
a very proud Sardar, and I remember after, I think a year or so after our meetings were on quite a regular basis, he asked me, have you been to a Gurdwara? I said, no. He said, ye kya? Kyun? I said, I don't know. I've never. He said, no, I'll take you. We went together, and there was a writer who would come from America who wrote 2-3 books on Sikhism.
Okay.
So 3 of us went, and he stood out, sat on the steps, but he said, "Andar jaakar dekh, acha laga?" I said, "Haan." So he was a very proud. The day he has to wear shalwar kameez, he used to look very happy. He said, "Aaj dhang ke kapde pehne." All those things, and simple living actually.
I think he may not have been religious, but he was very spiritual.
Yeah.
In
And
the sense that he...
And his
he was
history of
very
the
sensitive.
Sikhs, actually a masterpiece on the entire community. And every bit of information is there. He used to slog.
Yeah.
The thing tied also, to his strong identity, Sikh identity, and also a childlike reaction to everything was when he writes about when Rahul Singh, his son, when he cut his hair. And he said, I was Shattered.
Shattered is a word, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you think, but you're not a practicing Sikh. These things shouldn't matter so much to you, but they did. And I remember when I first met, and after having met him for some time, and he then finally asked, where are you from? I said, Himachal, and then he's whatever. Then finally he figured out, he said, so you're a Jat? So I said, well, yeah, I suppose. And so he said, so you never had hair? So I said, actually, no, I never did. I never grew my hair. So then he was okay. But he could be disapproving about these things. Not, of course, not that he would not forgive you for these things, but, you know, these things mattered to him.
It mattered.
He was also a nice,
Combination
contradictory
also.
person also. And, you know, the thing I loved most about him was that he was never afraid to contradict himself, to have contrary opinions,
Yes.
to, you know, it was like, I don't know who once said that, you know, did I say this yesterday? Okay, fine, but that was yesterday. Today is today.
Yeah, and he moved away. Like, if the minute he knew the dark side of a person, he should just move away. I mean, he said, no, I'd rather have few friends, but I can, मैं सबसे नहीं हो पाता है. That's the word. मेरे हो नहीं पा रहा है. He was very choosy actually.
Once I asked him, I said, only this Urdu poetry you keep reciting. Huh? And all this Ghalib and all the Pakistani
Iqbal,
poets and
Faiz,
Faiz and Faiz. I said, you don't know anything, say Hindi poetry or Sanskrit? He said, of course I do. I said, tell me. So he recited the initial verses of the Rig Veda for me.
No, he was
very
very well
beautiful.
versed about all religions. I think he taught also
Yeah.
religion in one of the US universities.
He said, no more beautiful poetry than you will find in the Bible. He recited the Gayatri Mantra he thought was
He knew
beautiful. Haridwar Aarti he loved. And of course, he really loved Sufi poetry and ghazal. So he was just an extraordinarily generous man in every way and inclusive.
We have to now take the concluding remarks. Just one minute.
So I've done only this, that, you know, it's unlikely that I will ever know a better human being and a better writer.
Narayani, you?
And I feel very privileged to have known him and to have been able to converse with him. And I think my life has been enriched because of my interactions with him.
Preeti?
For me, it's always just been a very gut kind of reaction and understanding of what he says, and that really speaks to me.
So thank you, Preeti, Narayani, Ravi, that we've been here and we could talk on Khushwant, although it's been painful because those images are getting back and you keep thinking about him, and I don't think wouldn't have met such a man in my life, and I miss him.
Thanks, Humra, for giving us this opportunity to talk about such a wonderful person.
Yes, I feel very grateful that I'm here and I could recollect some of the experiences with Khushwant. And I think it does us good to think of him in a good way and makes me feel good. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be part of this because, you know, it just sort of adds on to the person that I have read who now becomes somebody that you guys knew.
More alive.
Yeah. much
Thank
more
you.
alike.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion entitled With Malice Towards One and All. The participants were Narayani Ganesh, senior journalist and writer, Ravi Singh, well-known publisher, Preeti Gill, writer and publishing executive, and Humra Qureshi, well-known columnist and writer, who moderated the discussion. With assistance in production from Shahnawaz Khan and produced and presented by Naveen K. Gupta, this program was broadcast in our national program of talks and came to you from the Delhi station of All India Radio.